This week at Starbase, as construction continues at the air separation plant, Pad 2, and the Giga Bay, teams push on with the rapid assembly of Booster 19 and the demolition continues at Pad 1. With the launch mount already gone and several components of the cryogenic handling systems removed, just how much further do we think SpaceX is going to go with the demolition effort before teams can begin building out the redesigned Pad 1? Let's dig into this week's update and see if we can find out. Workers continue to assemble Booster 19 at breakneck pace, bringing out the fuel transfer tube and carefully lowering it inside the common dome assembly as they continue their Herculean efforts to test and fly the first Block 3 booster within the first months of 2026. And just to highlight how fast they're going, Booster 19 has reached the same state on day 19 of assembly as Booster 18 did by day 54. Shout out to the Starbase crew user Greg33 for this helpful chart that you see on screen. A long, hollow tube, which is probably a pressurization pipe for one of the main propellant tanks, was installed on Booster 19. And this was followed by the large torpedo-shaped liquid oxygen header tank, which was brought out of the Star Factory and taken to Mega Bay 1 for installation. After lifting up Booster 19 with the overhead crane, the LOX header tank was moved underneath and into the booster for installation. With the rapid progress in steelwork for the Giga Bay, new tower crane extensions called standard sections were delivered to the build site. The cranes will raise their cabs with hydraulic jacks and place each new section inside to keep up with construction. Over at the air separation plant site, workers set up new formwork to replace the concrete that was torn out. When the pump and cement trucks arrived, workers quickly began filling the forms. The forms were removed the next morning, revealing the newly placed concrete inside. A large, heavy-duty centrifugal compressor was installed on a frame above the high-pressure storage tanks. And while crews were busy with the installation of that compressor, a new motor was delivered for the air separation plant. A second compressor was lifted into place, followed by the newly delivered motor. However, it didn't stay in place for long. It was lifted back out a few hours later. Now, whatever issue caused that, crews apparently resolved it the next day, and the motor was reinstalled. Crews were still hard at work at Pad 1 as demolition continues ahead of the expected reconfiguration. With workers making use of SpaceX's large launch site crane, the first of two old methane tanks were rigged up and lifted onto an awaiting truck. While the first tank was hauled out of the complex, workers wasted no time and started rigging up the second one. A short while later, the second tank was then lifted up and hauled out of the launch site. The high-pressure gas cylinders, which stored carbon dioxide to drive the deluge system at Pad 1, were also removed from the site. After removing the first tank, two more were removed the next day. Meanwhile, over at Pad 2, the first of the protective access doors for the hold-down clamp arms was lifted and installed on the launch mount. A few hours later, the deluge system was activated as workers continue to fine-tune the system. A second follow-up test was performed the next day. Now over at the Massey's outpost, the ship's static fire stand was moved away from the flame trench where it had been ever since Starship 36 exploded all the way back in June. Cryo-testing continues on the Booster 18.3 test article with liquid nitrogen cycled in and out of the tank while workers make sure the structures and loading procedures perform within their design limits. And ringing in the holiday season, SpaceX and Cameron County hosted a Christmas-themed drone show this week. This week's Falcon 9 operations kicked off with the launch of Starlink Group 11-15, with Booster 1088 lifting off from Space Launch Complex 4E at Vandenberg to put 28 satellites into orbit before landing downrange on Of Course I Still Love You. Starlink Group 6-92 was the second launch of the week, rolling out to the pad at Launch Complex 39A on the same day as that previous launch. This Falcon 9 launch set a new record for the most flights by a single booster, marking the 32nd flight by Booster 1067. Additionally, among the 29 satellites sent into space was the 3,000th Starlink satellite launched in 2025. That's just hard to believe, isn't it? The booster successfully lifted off and landed on a shortfall of gravitas before being returned to port to be offloaded, packed up, and refurbished for its future 33rd flight. And to think they used to say these things could only fly 10 times. NROL 77, launched for the National Reconnaissance Office, was the third launch of the week. The Falcon 9 booster 1096 lifted off from Slick 40, carrying a classified US government payload into space. After staging, the booster performed a boost back burn and headed back to the coast before touching down at Landing Zone 2. This may be the last time a Falcon 9 lands at LZ2, with new operators taking over the pad in the near future, and Falcon 9 RTLS landings moving to the pads that they take off from. Afterwards, the NRO confirmed that the launch was a success, and Bob returned to port with both of the fairing halves from the mission. The fourth Falcon 9 launch of the week was another batch of 27 Starlink satellites launched from Slick 4E at Vandenberg on booster 1082 for the Starlink Group 15-11 mission. Once again, the booster was successfully recovered. The fifth and final launch of the week was Starlink Group 6-90, which lifted off with booster 1083 from Slick 40 with another 29 satellites for the Starlink constellation. It landed downrange on Just Read the Instructions. In some of our other space news, Rocket Lab revealed that they have completed qualification and acceptance testing of Neutron's payload fairing, showing off the Hungry Hippo in action as it rapidly opened and closed its doors in a second and a half. The fairing also withstood simulated max-Q loads, and the control fins successfully performed at 125% of the maximum expected flight loads. 2 new high-capacity liquid nitrogen tanks were delivered to Kennedy Space Center, continuing the pad build-outs that are underway across the Cape. Relativity Space released their November 2025 program update, detailing their developmental highlights and progress. Key milestones this past month include completing the conceptual design review for the future Block 2 Terran R vehicle, continued manufacturing progress on the first flight vehicle's first stage propellant tanks and second stage structures, and wind tunnel testing of the first stage. A pair of engines, one a first stage flight engine and the other an Aeon V development engine, were manufactured, assembled, and shipped, and engine testing is well underway with their Aeon vacuum development engine going through its first hot fire test campaign. In addition, launch infrastructure build-out continues, and Relativity also began foundation work for a new hangar and office space at the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. The factory floor has received breakover fixtures, installation tooling, and additional powder bed printers as they expand their production capacity to match their expected flight rates. The Canadian Space Agency has awarded Rocket Lab a contract to develop new reaction wheels for 500 to 1,000 kilogram satellites, increasing the country's involvement with the rapidly growing space sector and increasing Rocket Lab's involvement with more than just rockets. Axiom and KBR successfully completed the first thermal vacuum test of the Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or AXEMU, spacesuit, making sure that the suits are ready for NASA Artemis astronauts to wear on the lunar surface. Now, in some more unfortunate news, NASA announced this week that they have lost contact with the MAVEN spacecraft after it returned from the far side of Mars and the Deep Space Network did not reacquire its signal. MAVEN, or the Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution mission, is a climate-observing orbiter that has been orbiting the red planet since September of 2014, studying the presence of water and atmospheric gases, and also acting as a communications relay station for rovers on the Martian surface. So as you can imagine, it's a pretty important mission, so let's hope NASA reacquires signal soon. Now back to the fun stuff. Stoke Space showed a hot fire video of a developmental Zenith rocket engine demonstrating gimbaling with flight-like feed lines and a flight-like engine layout, as they continue to prepare for the first flight of their Nova small satellite launch vehicle. The United Launch Alliance announced their launch readiness review is underway for the next Amazon LEO, formerly Project Kuiper, mission on the company's Atlas V 551 rocket. After the review, the Amazon LEO satellites were integrated into the vehicle stack. The launch window opens on Monday between 3:49 and 4:18 a.m. Eastern Time for all of you night owls out there. Vast Space announced that radiator vibration testing is underway for the Haven 1 space station. The company is working to verify that the station's radiators, which are critical to controlling its temperature in orbit, can survive the rigors of launch. Don't want to be pulling a Skylab up there. A new radio astronomy instrument for Firefly Aerospace's second Blue Ghost mission arrived at Utah State University's Space Dynamics Laboratory for testing. The instrument will listen to radio emissions on the far side of the moon, capturing signals that are otherwise swamped by Earth-based transmissions. Blue Origin's CEO Dave Limp announced that New Glenn's second stage serial number 4 has completed hot fire testing and is ready to fly as the company works to ramp up New Glenn flight operations in the year ahead. And finally, it's speculation time. According to a Russian web forum and articles and statements posted this week, Russia's Soyuz launch service platform, which you may recall was ejected into the flame trench during last month's launch, was apparently giving ground teams trouble securing the structure before liftoff. Supposedly, the decision to launch was made in clear violation of launch criteria to avoid disappointing high-ranking officials and over 3,000 paid tourists. Now, it hasn't been fully confirmed whether or not this is true, but if it is, it would add another entry in the long list of cautionary tales across the history of spaceflight against Go fever. Always remember, scrubs are better than booms. And speaking of booms, that is the end of another booming week of spaceflight news. That segue didn't really work, did it? Anyway, if you want to stay up to date on all the goings-on here in the spaceflight world, make sure to click all those fancy buttons down there and stick around here at LabPadre. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up. As always, a big thank you to all of our supporters out there, and until next time, this is Caden, signing off.